Hi, this is John from John Breaks Watches, and today we're going to be attempting not to destroy an Eldridge Model 9. And if you've not heard of Eldridge, that's not an entire surprise. It was a trade name for movements made by the New York Standard Watch Company. There were a whole number of companies who used these movements, including companies like LaSalle, Pacific, Remington, Wilmington Special, Bay State. So it's a real classy watch, naturally. It's actually quite a nice movement, and we're going to see how much damage we can do to it. But it does at least wind up a little bit. The hand's set okay. However, when I've put it on the time grapher, it's got a beat error of about 8 milliseconds, which is not great. Amplitude's low, somewhere around 180, and it's running about 102 seconds fast every day, which is not ideal. So the hope is that maybe if we tear this down, give it a service, we can make something good out of it. Or at least something better. You can see the dial is a little bit cracked there on the front, but for the most part it actually looks like it's in pretty good condition. I still don't have my my hand levers yet, so work with me here as we use a classy set of screwdrivers to remove the hands. Interestingly, I did see one other YouTuber who removes the seconds hand at the same time as removing the dial, and in some respects that may be safer. That hand is so flimsy. It may actually be more reasonable to let the dial, as the dial comes off, just let it lift the hand off its pivot at the same time. But that's fine. So we're going to take out we're going to loosen the dial screws here, so we can take the dial off and take a look at that. It comes off pretty easily, which is nice. And I'm going to tighten those dial screws back up in a second, just because I don't want to lose them when they go in for a bath. The back is a charming green colour again on that dial. As you can see, there's quite a lot going on underneath the dial for a fairly simple watch. In addition to the motion works, we've also got the ratchet is on this side, and there's also a large plate which has the jewels for the escape wheel and the pallet fork. This watch is from about 1910. It's quite late in the run of this particular model. It's still ticking away 112 years after manufacture, which is not bad going at all. So we took the cannon pinion off there using a Presto tool. It came off a little bit easier than the last watch we did, which is nice. Alright, let's get this flipped over and we'll take a look at the other side. Although maybe let's not put the spiky center wheel directly on the gel cushion where it can puncture it, huh? Yeah, let's put this in a stand instead. That might be a good idea. So we can start tearing down the interesting part of the watch. We'll undo the screw on the balance cock. Oh, we're going to try. I've been working on my screwdriving skills and trying to destroy slightly less and put less pressure on the movement, in part so I can try and avoid scratching things, which is a bad habit to be in. And it's working to some extent, so I'm going to keep practicing. The more you do it, the better it gets, right? Alright, so let's take off the balance. If I can figure out where to grab it. Sometimes that's the problem. Some watches have a nice little cutout where you can get a screwdriver in, or a pair of tweezers, and others just have nothing. And this is one of the nothing variety, which is okay, but still. So we flip to the back here. We're going to take off this cover plate, and the plate has a spring that runs through. It's just a bent metal spring, kind of a stretched out L shape, that actually runs through a small groove on the underside of the plate, and that holds it in and it pushes against the ratchet spring. Now this is me being fearful of spring. No, don't jump. Now I know it's attached. At the time I didn't. So as springs go, that's a pretty nice one to remove. It's as you can see there where it actually is mounted in that groove, and is effectively attached, which makes it much nicer to deal with. And then under that, just see the ratchet next to, I guess in this watch, what is the ratchet wheel effectively? So there's the ratchet. And of course, having foolishly forgotten to wind the watch down, I'm now doing that carefully on the ratchet wheel. It didn't have much power in it anyway, but that was a good opportunity to grab it. You can see the square hole in the middle, and that connects up to the barrel arbor in the barrel. So it's funnily enough, I think of this as the top side to me, but of course in reality it's the back side. It's not the dial side of the watch, but it's the fun side. So we're going to take out these case screws. Not that we have a case for this anyway, this is just a movement again. Grabbing a screwdriver with a pair of tweezers to get them out of the way. It's kind of... there's something deeply psychological there. Unscrew the crown wheel. This is a fairly straightforward crown wheel, but we'll see when we get these screws out that the crown wheel screw has shoulders on it at the top of the thread, so it has a small flat area so that the gear can rotate, whereas this wheel here, because it's going to screw in directly to the barrel arbor, does not need the same shoulders on it, because it's going to go with the gear. And you can just see in this close-up, you can see on the right shoulders on that screw for the crown wheel. Nice and greasy, stuck down. Did you see that catch with the tweezers? Did you see it? Was it good? Hands like flypaper. Alrighty. So it looks like we're now able to take the top plate off and reveal the goodness within. I quite like this, the patterning that they've put on the top plate. You've got perlage on the bottom plate, or the main plate, and I don't know what you call this crisscross thing, but it's nice. It's very pretty. See those jewels shine. We've got a barrel which does not want to come off. And this is a repeating theme as we put it back together. Doesn't like coming off. So we'll take the train of gears apart now. Apparently very hesitantly on my part. But remember, I'm still learning. I'm still trying not to break things too much. Escape wheel coming out. And out comes the center wheel. Or second wheel if you want. And just the third wheel to come out now. So now we'll take off the pallet fork bridge. This one's kind of fun. It's shaped kind of a little bit like a snake. It goes at right angles. And we go what follows around the curve of the outside of the watch, and then jumps at right angles to go inside to provide the top pivot for the pallet fork. It's kind of a cute shape. Oh, there's the pallet fork itself. removing the lever that goes behind where the winding stem goes in. And when you push in on that, we'll see later, when you push in on the winding stem, it'll push that, and in turn that's engaging the gears on the back for winding. And if you don't push it in, the gears are engaged to set the time. So we're going to get rid of this rather large spring. It's very simple. I mean, it's a big piece of metal, but it just holds in there. There's nothing holding it down. There's no plates keeping the spring from disappearing there. This is me desperately trying to identify the screws so I can find them later. I did all right this time, but didn't get it right. So that's what that spring acts upon, and that in turn pushes this plate, which has 3 gears underneath it, which are just held there with well, when you take it off, they're held there with friction. They basically sit on the plate. They're stopped from escaping by having some little bumps that come up on the plate that the gears go around. You can see how they fit together here. That middle gear, though, in terms of the plate, there's nothing holding it in place. That's held by the screw that I took out to take that plate out. So the whole plate can rotate, can pivot around the middle, and therefore change which part of the gears are engaged. So this all ties back in with the lever on the other side that you push in with the winding stem, and that in turn pushes through the case, rocks this back and forward and changes where the gears are attached. And then when you stop pushing on the winding stem, the springs push everything back into hand setting mode. Yeah, that screw's a little bit tight. And I'm really trying here not to push down on the movement, because when you do that, if the screwdriver starts to slip, it goes flying at high speed and scratches up the watch. So I'm really trying to hold it in place but rotate the screwdriver. Alright, so these 2 screws from the dial side go through, and you'll see we've had a couple of pieces fall down onto the paper there. Basically, this is what we were looking at from the other side. There's a cover plate there, and then this gear, which is where the winding stem goes in. And we'll have some amusement with those later as I get caught out. And there's the 2 screws that were holding it in. Now we'll take off this plate that's in place that has jewels in for the top side. I imagine there's a really good reason why it's a completely separate plate. I don't know what it is, and it may just be in order to make more space vertically for some of the pivots. But either way, it's good and sticky. Now the hole in the main plate to allow access to those. So there you go, there's the main plate stripped down. Just the barrel left now. We'll click the cover off that. Grab the lid. And the spring inside actually looks like it has been replaced before. It's not that kind of dark, the black metal we've seen on a lot of the pocket watches. This looks fairly new and shiny, certainly fairly powerful. It's also a longer spring than some of the others I've taken apart. I'm more used to the straight spiral springs that I've seen on the pocket watches. This one's got a lovely tail on it and a little bit of counter bend. So there's all the pieces. It's a pretty straightforward watch, and let's get everything at high speed put into containers so we can throw them into the ultrasound and give them a bath. Yeah, I nearly put the pallet fork in there again. Can't decide if that's a good or a bad thing. There it all is, just about fits. It's going to have to do, it's what I've got. Bing! Dinner's done. And there's everything nicely cleaned up. So we're going to start the assembly process again. Let's get that plate back on first. The bits I don't show is that I have actually checked. I've pegged out the jewel holes and things like that, and I have actually tried to check them as best I can to make sure there aren't any cracked jewels. They all seemed fine. Now, I'll say that I do not have a microscope at this point, but you know, I get in as close as I can with as much magnification as I have, and they did look fine. So the New York Standard Watch Company, who made this Eldridge branded movement, they launched in August 1885, which is not bad going, and they were based, would you believe it, out of Jersey City, New Jersey. So they should probably really be the New Jersey Standard Watch Company, but I guess who's picky, right? I'm struggling with this escape wheel, and I really shouldn't be. I'm obviously just having a bad day. On with the fourth wheel. We're going to slide under the third wheel. Wonder how far I'm going to get putting things in this order. Do you think it's going to work? No. The answer's no. I should have checked this before I did it on camera. But there you go, you get to see my mistakes too. So let me quickly snag off the fourth wheel. Now I'll put the center wheel in, and then I can put the fourth wheel back where it should be. I'm again trying to rebuild the watch from memory and based on deduction of where the parts should go. Ooh, spinning nicely. And that has some interesting consequences which prove my idiocy. But nonetheless, it's kind of fun trying. It's a good challenge. Off camera, I've rewound the barrel, greased it. Very, very lightly, but greased it nonetheless. And this is where some of my idiocy comes in here. So now I'm going to put that winding gear back in. I'm putting the stem that's inside it, a little rod that's inside it back in. That's what's going to push to engage the gears, and now I'm going to screw it in place. And I did fiddle a little bit with the screws on this. I've spared you the fun of me deciding which screws should be in here. But I finally decided these were the right screws and put them in. The observant among you may spot the mistake I'm currently making, and I'll tell you very shortly what it was. If you know what it is, give yourself a round of applause in the comments, because you're doing better than I did. I'm going to throw some screws around, get this second one. I'm about to make another mistake just to compound this one. The other thing that I haven't necessarily shown in the video is that there has been some oiling or greasing going along as we go. Oh look, there's some 9504 grease there. So yes, that has been going on, but I didn't want to bore you with it because the video is bad enough as it is, right? So let's get this top plate on, and we'll see if we can persuade it to get all the pivots in. And you're hoping that when it's rocking around, that at some point you'll finally get that little as everything gets into the right place. Come on, you can do it. Try and poke at some of the wheels. It's always nice when it finally goes. Ooh, rocking everywhere. And take a quick look from the side. Which of you is being troublesome? Sorry for the terrible angle, but here it goes. Ready? Oh, did you see it pop down? Yeah, that's what we're looking for. It just dropped down into place. And at that point, that basically means everything's aligned. And we're able to test it in a second and make sure that all the wheels are rotating freely. I edit this down, as I said, partly to make myself look better, obviously. Which is working because this looks professional, right? And also partly because you don't want to see me hesitating and checking and rechecking and then checking again. Alright, so I mentioned that I'd made a mistake. Well, actually I made two mistakes. The first mistake is that when I put the screws back in on the cover that was covering that winding gear, you may recall that the screws actually go in from the other side of the main plate. We had to turn over to the dial side in order to undo those screws. There we go, you can see the gears are moving nicely. So that was my first mistake. I've put the screws in the wrong place, and actually what that's done is, although we can't see it very easily here, is that those screws are now kind of pressing up against that top plate. The top plate's very close to being in the right position, but it's not quite there. It's just a little bit of pressure on it. And so at some point we're going to go back and fix that. The other thing that I made a mistake on, my compounding error, was that having described how there's a pin inside that inside the winding gear that gets pushed down, and that pushes against a little mechanical lever, and that lever pushes through to the passes through to the other side so that it can move the gears around. You may notice I forgot to put that lever back. So right now the pin that in the winding stem, you push against it, there's nothing for it to touch. This was not smart. So I'm putting the pallet fork back in, and then the pallet fork bridge. I will say this did give me some grief. I found it's quite tricky with the pallet forks because often before the pallet fork bridge is in, or pallet fork cock in this case, I guess it's only got the one screw, it's often the pallet fork wants to kind of fall down, and so it looks like it's not in the right place. Once the pallet fork cock is in place, it holds the pivot upright, holds the pinion upright, and at that point it's now actually at the right height for you to be able to put the for it to engage with the balance wheel. But things always seem a little bit wonky until that point, and it always kind of gets me. Nonetheless, we did get it eventually. So at this point I realize, as I look at my pile of parts, that I've goofed. So everything we've done so far, we're undoing it. And sometimes that's just what you gotta do. There's no way around it. There's no point trying to force parts in place. You just have to tear it down. And since I'm going to have to turn the whole plate over to put those screws in from the other side, all of my wheels are going to fall out. You know, the train of gears are just going to fall out anyway. So bad luck, John. Take them out, and do it right this time. This also means I'm going to have to figure out how to hold things in place on this side while I flip the entire plate to put screws in from the other side. But that's what Rodico's for. So I've used Rodico to hold everything in place so I can throw my screws in, screw everything up, and I don't mean that literally. I can do the screws up, take Rodico off, and now that's in place. So I'm happy. And now this time I'm actually going to put that little lever on behind the winding gear there. And I'm feeling much smarter for having done so. If only I'd done both these things right the first time. But again, we live and learn. This is also, if I'd actually gone back and looked at the teardown, I probably would have spotted that, but I didn't. So this is partly what happens when you try and do things from memory. But like I say, good learning exercise. Oh, you notice that gear isn't sprung? That lever isn't sprung, rather, and the reason for that is it's going to get sprung on the other side. Alright, so let's put the train of gears back in, and a smart man would remember putting them in the wrong order earlier and get it right this time. But I'm not a smart man. I goof up the exact same way and have to take out the fourth wheel again. However, here we go. Let's get the top plate back on. Yay, everything looks good. Okay, we're in good shape. This top plate actually did go on quite nicely. I appreciate you, top plate. And now we'll put on the crown wheel and what I guess is, well, it's not really a ratchet wheel, but it's a barrel wheel. I say it's not a ratchet wheel because the ratchet was on the other side. And we've got screw with shoulders for the crown wheel. I don't want to scratch it because it has a nice finish on it. It's close. Young man. So the screw's done up. I'm trying to move it so that I can get the shoulders in place, but it's not looking right, is it? I have a movable gear. But for now, let's move on, and we'll put the other gear that goes on top of the barrel. Let's put that one there, beautifully emblazoned, Eldridge USA, and we'll try putting a screw in that as well and see if we can hold that one down, and then we'll figure out what's wrong with the crown wheel. So we're going to put this screw in, and it's at that point I'm going to discover or decide that it's the wrong screw. This one's too long. And this is screwing into the barrel arbor in the middle of the barrel. And unfortunately what's going to happen is, as I do it up, it's rotating the arbor. It's catching on the spring, which is fine, it's what you'd expect it to do. However, when I realise I've made a mistake and I need to undo it, it then doesn't want to come out, because when I move it, when I turn it backwards, it's just rotating the arbor backwards in the middle of the spring. Not smart. So at the end I had to grab the ratchet wheel on the other side to stop the whole thing rotating in order to remove the screw. So I've taken both screws out, I've figured out what I did wrong, and now put the crown wheel back in, move it so that the hole in the crown wheel fits inside fits around the shoulder on that screw that we looked at earlier, and that will hold it nicely. And yes, it was lightly oiled as well, since that's going to be rotating there. And then, hooray! And this time the gears actually mesh. We don't have one gear that wanders off to the side. Okay, and then we'll put the other screw on above the barrel, so this will go into the barrel arbor. I can feel your frustration at the screwdriver action. I'm sorry, I'm working on it. But there we go, quick test, and yep, getting some spring back. So we're catching the spring, and there's no ratchet yet, but at least we know we're winding it up. So now we're going to flip over to the other side. We already put that plate on. Now we're going to put the ratchet wheel with its little square hole that goes on the bottom of the barrel arbor. So that's sticking out the bottom of the barrel through the main plate and out to that side. And we're going to put that cover back with its spring in place. And we're going to screw it on. And again, the observant among you might spot something important that John's forgotten. Other than how to do up screws. But yes, there was the actual ratchet is supposed to be on the right hand side of that and touching the ratchet wheel. It is missing. And so inevitably, you know, I'm coming back to that and I'm going to have to take it off again. But for now, I'll continue on blindly. So to put these 3 gears back, because they rotate around posts that are actually on this plate that looks like a small cow, I'm just putting a few dabs of oil on there so that the gears actually should stick with the oil. They should basically grip onto that plate. So we'll put the gears on top, and that's especially important because as I said, that center gear, for example, as you can see, it doesn't actually hold on to anything, it just sits there. So by giving it some oil, it just gets a little bit sticky, and now I can pick the whole thing up with all 3 gears in place and flip it over and get things and get the plate and the gears in pretty much the right place on the main plate. Well, that worked pretty successfully. That's a good trick, I like that one. Naturally, looking at it, it looks like I used 9010, and I question myself on that because I'm feeling like I should have used some HP 1300 instead, but you know what, let's run with it. As it turns out, that's the least of my problems. So, nice big screw that's going to go in here. It's got quite a deep head on it. Again, effectively it's kind of acting similarly to shoulders on the crown screw, the crown wheel screw. So when we position this, we've got to make sure that it goes fully in. And there's also the end of the spring that comes out from the ratchet spring. And I'd like to be able to tell you that this is the point at which I realized I'd forgotten to put the ratchet on, but it's not. This is simply that the end of that spring, in order to put it where I wanted it, it was easier just to take off the little ratchet wheel plate and put it back on so the spring was on top and could be positioned. It was easier to do that than it was to try and maneuver the 3 gears underneath that larger plate. So I chose the easier of the 2, although you wouldn't believe that by looking at the way I'm handling the screwdriver. But I promise you, it was the easier of the 2. And looking back, I'm not sure whether or not the spring should have been on the outside of that plate, like that, or should have been on the inside. I like it on the outside. It gives an additional push back. A little bit of extra spring. But really its main purpose is for the ratchet wheel. For the ratchet. Gonna put this lever in now. Probably has a much better name, but I don't know what it is. And what you probably couldn't see is that had a peg on it that sticks out of the bottom, and that goes through the main plate On the other side, we've talked about how there's a pin inside the winding gear that can be pushed in by the winding stem and can interact with a little lever on the other side. Well, that in turn interacts with the peg that goes through to this side of the movement. So that's how it has an impact on this side of the movement. That's how it transfers the winding stem activity. Hey, nearly lost a screw there. Hooray! Alright, so finally I've realized that this is the third time I need to take this off, and it's time to get the ratchet in place. The ratchet itself, you notice there's no standout from the main plate, but instead there's a peg on the underside of that V-shaped plate. So that's what's going to position the ratchet, and that's where it's going to be pivoting. And then we're going to use the spring there around the back of it to make sure that it's being pulled into the wheel. Such uncertainty. Is it done up tight enough? Is it too tight? Well, we'll never know. Alright, you might notice that just behind the plate there you can see a small hole in the side of the main plate rim, and that would allow you to put a tool inside to manually trigger the ratchet spring so that you could wind down the watch. So you could basically stick a screwdriver or a key into the winding stem hole, and then you could still have access to the ratchet from the outside. In theory. We can see this is all moving quite nicely. I love watching gears move. I think that's part of the satisfaction with watches, is just basically seeing the mechanics of how one thing affects another. So this time, using what's called a bench key, we're able to validate that by pushing in and then winding, I'm engaging the winding mechanism. And now we'll just check whether or not the pallet fork's springing back and forward. It does seem to be. It's not very heavily wound at this point, and I think that's why it's not 100% as active as I'd like it to be. But we'll fix that shortly. So now's the good bit. We get to put the balance wheel in and find out whether or not this watch is going to spring back to life. And this ended up taking quite some significant time to finally get in place. I'm just giving you a highlight reel here of my multiple attempts and failures. But as I said before, if watchmaking teaches you anything, it's patience. You have to be, without much choice, you have to be willing to try again and try again and try again, especially when it's something fiddly like this. Until it finally works. There's no point getting frustrated and angry with it, because that just puts you in the wrong frame of mind. And I do find that actually concentrating on this, it's an awful lot easier to stay calm and stay focused, rather than get frustrated and start making mistakes. But eventually it's got to go in. At least I'd like to think eventually it has to go in. So we'll see if we can finally get this in the right place. Come on now, you can do it. Yay! Alright. It took a while. The effort was worth it though, because now we have a very much alive watch. That's the happy place, when that balance wheel finally starts kicking in. So everything's great now. All we've got to do is flip it over, put the dial on, put the hands on, and success. We'll all go home, and what a great opportunity this has been to...
Yep, that's me. You're probably wondering how I ended up in this situation.
It's because I'm an idiot. Okay, so here's the story. I realized that I needed to oil the balance jewels. And I realized that in order to get to those, because this is an older balance, I was going to have to take the balance off again. And after all the effort I put in before, you can imagine that wasn't great. So I took it off, and then I had some trouble getting to the jewel, ended up just kind of oiling it, and then I put the balance back on and noticed that the hairspring wasn't looking very happy. And so I took the balance back off, and I thought, well, let's be brave and we'll take the hairspring out and we'll see if that's looking good when it's not attached to the balance wheel. And it kind of was, but unfortunately the bit I took off was probably not the right bit to take off. There is a peg where the hairspring terminates. The peg has a very small hole in it. The end of the hairspring goes into that peg, and then the hairspring is wedged into that peg with a very tiny piece of metal. And so here's that little peg with the tiny hole in it that you can't see. And then that in front of it, you can see that's the peg hole where it goes into the balance cock. So that's fairly small. But this tiny thing here, that is the little piece of metal that wedges into the hole in the peg along with the end of the hairspring. And so far, I have not managed to get those two things to go back together. I am determined that I will. But for now, I'm taking a break because patience and honestly frustration. So I'm leaving this alone. I'm going to put it in a box and put it aside, and then I'm going to come back to this when I can get a better idea of what's going on. Meanwhile, let's have a moment of silence for the Eldridge Model 9. May she rest in pieces. Just remember, John breaks watches, although it does make him a little bit sad. So subscribe and see if I can get it going in a future episode. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you staying here with me. I hope you found it fun. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the comments and I'll do my best to answer. See you next time.